What really happened with your host, Mike Rivero, because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Monday, June 18th, 2018, start of a brand new week here. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Mike is in our control room, ready to answer the phones when you call on in, put you on the air with your comments, questions, observations, opinions, and so forth. Right now, the Senate committee hearing on the Inspector General report is taking place, and a lot of interesting stuff is coming on out of there. For one thing, Inspector General Horowitz made the admission that they didn't examine every one of Peter Strzok's decisions. Now, remember, one of the things that came out in the IG report was they claimed that they were unable to find any cases where the very obvious political bias of these people in the FBI actually influenced a decision. And, of course, the corporate media went to town with that, saying no political influence whatsoever. And now we're finding out they didn't actually examine all the decisions. So that statement that they didn't find any evidence simply means they didn't find, and in some cases they weren't even looking. It certainly does not mean that there wasn't any political influence going on at all. All right, well, we're going to be keeping an eye on what's going on the Senate committee. A lot of talk going back and forth, a lot of spin doctoring and so forth. But we'll come back to that a little bit later in the program. Getting over to the war zones, there's a lot of stuff going on the corporate media is really not talking about. And as usual, we start with Syria. Syrian government forces have cleared capped Mount Shadid Hill and other areas of Abar Waraq and Bir Atshan near the T2 pumping station from the ISIS cells. Those pumping stations are, of course, very important. ISIS has been basically stealing Syria's oil and smuggling it across the border into Turkey to fund themselves. But the pumping stations are now back under Syrian government control. So bit by bit, Syria is winning this war. And what's really interesting is to watch the United States is out there literally threatening measures against Syria for going into the southwest after ISIS and Al-Qaeda. Well, the only place ISIS and Al-Qaeda still exist are in areas controlled by the United States, which shouldn't even be there. It has no mandate to be there. There's no declaration of war by the United States Congress. There's no Security Council resolution. The United States does not have a legitimate purpose being in there. And they have been selling it to you for the last 4 years, I think, on we're just there to get ISIS and Al-Qaeda, interspersed with Assad is gassing his own people, Assad is an evil tyrant, we want to bring democracy to the Middle East and so forth and so on. But a lot of people are saying it's very revealing that the U.S. is threatening Syria not to go after ISIS and Al-Qaeda here. And apparently, over the weekend, U.S.-led coalition aircraft bombs Syrian military positions. Now, you're not going to see this on TV, and the Pentagon is actually denying that this happened. Because obviously, if the U.S. is bombing Syrian government positions, it puts the lie to the claim that they were just there for ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And it's back to just flat-out war on Syria without a declaration of war, without a UN Security Council resolution. And apparently, these aircraft made an airstrike on the positions of Syrian troops in Al-Hara settlement, which is southeast of Al-Bukamal, killing several servicemen and injuring others. And again, U.S. Department spokesman is out there saying, nope, wasn't us. Now, one of the reports coming in says that drones may have been used. And they're saying they're American drones. And the U.S. is saying, no, it wasn't us. Well, the only other party in the area with drones is Israel, trying to stir up trouble. But I tend to think that it was a U.S. strike. They're still trying to protect their buddies, ISIS and Al-Qaeda, but they don't want the American people to understand they've been lied to all along about the reasons we're in Syria, as we have been lied to about the reasons we're in Afghanistan. We were lied to about the reasons we went into Iraq, lied to about the reasons we're in Yemen, Libya, so forth and so on. Now, Netanyahu is responding to criticism over Israel's continued bombing of Syria, saying, no, no, no. See, what we're doing here is this will prevent more refugees from fleeing to Europe. That's his latest excuse and spin. That Israel is bombing Syria to stop the refugees going to Europe. That's the real reason we're doing that. And anybody who doesn't believe me is a dirty, filthy anti-Semite who wants Hitler to come back and gas Jewish babies in the ovens. Now, Israel is once again trying to push the propaganda that Iran is getting ready to attack Israel from inside Syria. Now, remember what I said. To find out if you're being lied to, look for what should be there and isn't. And what isn't is a reason for Iran to do something that foolish. Israel is, after all, nuclear armed. They have the backing of the United States. Iran knows they're next on the to-be invaded list. They're trying to figure out some way not to have this happen. They're not going to attack Israel to provoke it. Israel could stage a false flag attack, and probably will. But they're still pushing that out. They still want Iran. All right, we're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Turning on down to Yemen, things are just going from bad to worse down there. Saudi warplanes have hit the airport in Yemen's Hodeidah, and at last report, Saudi forces have taken control of it. Apparently, the airstrikes are so intense, it's 24 hours a day, and the sound of the warplanes is now a constant. According to Le Figaro, French special forces are on the ground in Yemen. It really is starting to look like we're already in a world war. Everybody's troops are all over the planet fighting everybody else's wars. And apparently the French special forces are there with the United Arab Emirates. And the newspaper and the defense ministry are not saying what they're there for, but I don't think it's there to make picnic baskets for those poor people of Yemen. And boy, do they need it. Remember that port in Hodeidah is the only conduit for food and medicine and humanitarian aid to get into Yemen. And the Saudi/US coalition is trying to cut it off in order to starve the people of Yemen into surrender, which, by the way, is a crime against humanity. Story coming out of The Intercept. The U.S. is exacerbating the world's worst humanitarian crisis by outsourcing its Yemen policy. And this article is taking the point of view that the U.S. policy in Yemen would have preferred a more civilized victory, and that a lot of the atrocities that we're seeing are by the Saudis and the United Arab Emirates. And they are effectively driving American policy decisions in the U.S. But the reality is that the Saudis and the United States are ignoring all these international aid groups' warnings that they're bringing famine to the land. And a lot of people, a lot of non-combatants, a lot of civilians are going to be dying. And now that new cholera treatment center built by Doctors Without Borders has been blown up, the cholera is still spreading. And we cannot rule out the possibility that it was weaponized, because it's now one of the largest cholera outbreaks in history, and it wouldn't be the first time cholera is used as a biological weapon of war. The United Nations is saying nearly 5,000 families have been displaced already in Hodeidah. 36 of the families have lost their entire livelihood as the Saudis are bombing their farms. Now, last week we were talking about this plan where the Houthis were going to cede control of the Hodeidah port to the United Nations. So it would be off the battlefield and would still be available for all parties to send ships in and out. And it apparently went all the way up to the Security Council, and to nobody's surprise, the United States vetoed it. So, surprisingly, did Great Britain. And British Ambassador Karen Pierce said their opposition was made purely based on the British national interest. Now, I'm not exactly how preventing food from being delivered to the Yemeni civilians is in the British national interest, but apparently that's the decision that they have made. I think Washington arm-twisted London so they wouldn't be standing there alone, or Nikki Haley wouldn't be standing there all by herself yet again screaming veto over Security Council resolutions in dire need of being passed. See, it's not just the U.S. Great Britain's with us. See, you know, there's two. There's two. We want the people of Yemen to starve here. Over in northern Iraq, Turkish airstrikes have killed 35 Kurdish PKK, and officials are saying the airstrikes were directed at the PKK movement, which Turkey accuses of having a large presence in the region. Now, PKK is considered a banned terrorist group in Turkey, and during a ceasefire in recent years, many of the PKK fighters relocated to northern Iraq to wait for the results of peace talks, which unfortunately, sadly, ultimately collapsed, and Turkey just resumed the war. Now, up in Afghanistan, over the Ramadan holiday, they had a ceasefire between the Afghan government and the Taliban. And now that Ramadan is over, the Afghan government and the Taliban have said, let's just keep it going. We kind of like this thing about not shooting each other. In fact, during the Eid ceasefire, Taliban and Afghan were coming together, taking selfies, and hugging each other. It was like the Christmas Day truce in World War I. And it's sending a message that these people don't want to fight each other, that foreign countries and their intelligence agencies are keeping alive the flames of war in Afghanistan to reach their various nefarious designs. Control of the oil, control of the opium. And it does look like one of those foreign interests did try and mess up the Ramadan ceasefire, because 17 people were killed at a meeting of Taliban and Afghan security forces during the ceasefire. So, yeah, somebody's trying to keep that going up there here. India has decided to resume their military operations in Kashmir. They had also had a 30-day ceasefire for Ramadan, but unlike Afghanistan, India has said, yep, let's go back to doing the bad things that we were doing here. War is just everywhere. Now, we've been talking about how down in Israel, they're putting forward this bill that would make it a prison offense to take pictures or videos of IDF actions against the Palestinians. And the bill came out of committee. It's gone to the Knesset. But there's a monkey wrench in the works. The Israeli Attorney General is saying it will not survive a constitutional review. It will be declared unconstitutional under Israel's current constitution. So what they're going to do about that, we don't know. We do know that the IDF does target journalists, trying to shut down the flow of information coming out from Gaza. Apparently, Israel has now changed its West Bank planning policy, and they've basically loosened up the rules by which homes can be arbitrarily demolished, including ones that have a proper building permit. Normally, when Israel goes into the West Bank, or for that matter, East Jerusalem, and they'll knock down buildings, they'll say, well, there's no building permit. And Israel is very stingy about handing out those permits. But the new rule says that a home can be declared for demolition even if it has a building permit, and the building's owners only have 96 hours to appeal the decision, and the appeal could be turned down. So now even buildings with proper building permits will be demolished over there in the West Bank. About 2 weeks ago, we were reporting on this move, or this talk, it never went anywhere, in the U.S. Congress, for the U.S. to recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan. Now remember, Israel annexed the Golan back in 1981. No other government on earth recognizes it. It's still occupied territory, but there was talk that the U.S. might recognize that Golan is now part of Israel. But that really fell apart in the fallout from the move of the U.S. Embassy to Jerusalem. And apparently Israeli members of the Knesset, being pushy, kept on demanding, you will recognize our sovereignty of Golan, to the point where the U.S. envoy to Israel, David Friedman, just berated them for being ungrateful. You know, we just gave you the relocation of the embassy, and here you're back already asking for more. Just gimme, 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 gimme. Never happy, are you? Turning on over to Korea, over at StephenLenman.org, he's got this article, Will U.S. Dark Forces Sabotage Improving Relations with North Korea? Which is a question we were asking just as soon as the summit was over, because there are parties who do not want this to move forward. And so, according to Stephen's article, he's saying the CIA may play a lead role in undermining improved bilateral relations because its House organ is militarily hostile to Pyongyang. Over in the Washington Compost, they're out there saying, no more concessions, no more concessions. And everybody's like piling all over Donald Trump because he didn't get more. Well, he got the denuclearization, and that was the stated purpose for going over there. But speaking of dark forces attempting to wreck this deal, it's already starting to happen because apparently U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has delivered a 47-point list of demands to Pyongyang. And this is actually coming to us through the Japanese media. And apparently, the list of demands includes elimination in transparent and irreversible form of the nuclear stockpile and other types of weapons of mass destruction, including chemical and biological ones, as well as missiles and all relevant infrastructures. In other words, Pompeo just moved the goalposts by adding in the missiles. And that one is going to likely kill the deal, because that would leave North Korea totally defenseless in the event of an attack by the United States. And I'm sure Kim Jong-un's advisors are out there reminding Kim Jong-un what happened to Iraq when they gave up their weapons of deterrence. What happened to Libya when they gave up their weapons of deterrence. What's happening to Syria now when they gave up their weapons of deterrence. Always in exchange for U.S. security guarantees, which just evaporated. Pompeo and Trump are also pursuing a hawkish course on Venezuela. I guess they've decided now that the economic war has devastated Venezuela, it's time to move on in and get that pesky socialist government out there that believes on spending the people's money on the people. We got to get them out of there. It's setting a bad example for the rest of the world. And so they're lobbying for Venezuela's ouster from the Organization of American States. And what is really sickening to me is Mike Pompeo's speech to the Organization of American States, in which he says, and try not to laugh, the United States prioritizes a Western Hemisphere distinguished by democracy, peace, respect for human rights, and cooperation. Boy, oh boy. Apparently, the United States is getting ready to double the number of Marines they have stationed in Norway to counter Russian aggression. Well, again, I'm not seeing Russian troops massing along our borders. It's all NATO and the U.S. just crunching in closer and closer on Russia. They're not the aggressors here. They never were. Meanwhile, Secretary of Defense Mattis is out there accusing Putin of trying to undermine America's moral authority. So over at the U.S. Naval War College during the graduation ceremony, U.S. Secretary of Defense James Mattis asserted that Vladimir Putin aims to diminish the appeal of the Western democratic model and attempts to undermine America's moral authority. Well, I think anybody looking at what's going on right now, both in Europe and the United States, is realizing the Western democratic model has got serious problems. And it isn't very appealing when you look at what's happening to ordinary people. And after 18 years of wars on nations which have not attacked us, America doesn't have any moral authority left for Putin to undermine. Now, both with regard to this statement and some of the others they've made, there's an important thing you need to remember about propaganda. For propaganda to work, it has to be believable. If you come on out there with these ridiculous statements about, the United States wants peace and cooperation, if the person listening to it, their palm hits their forehead, that's not good, effective propaganda. You've lost them already. We're going to take a break now for some commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And we are now getting confirmation from CNN, no less, that in fact it was Israel that carried out that attack on Syrian military personnel over the weekend. which is an act of war. And if you look at the distance between Israel and where the attack happened up on the border with Iraq, if there were warplanes, other than the drones, if there were warplanes, they'd require aerial refueling. Now, Israel's justification for that is that Syria's army is linked with Iran. Remember a while back they said there are Iranian troops on the ground. They were Iranian troops. They were justifying bombing all these buildings. It's an Iranian troop barrack. And then it came on out, there are no Iranian troops in Iran. There were a few Iranian advisors. So now the bar has been changed. It's Iranian linked. They're linked to Iran. That justifies going into Syria and blowing things up. And I imagine that both Syria and Russia are showing restraint in the face of this naked aggression, knowing that Israel's real goal is to provoke a response by Syria that would allow the United States to come on in full bore and just take over the place, which has been the goal for the last going on 8 years. Last May, the House Armed Services Committee voted for the current version of the National Defense Authorization Act. The bill passed 60-1. There was one vote against it, and I felt it was important to mention that sole vote against it came from Hawaii's own Tulsi Gabbard. Now, the way the media is reporting it is, she's voting for Russia. She's voting to undermine our defense. But I'll tell you right now, if Gabbard runs for president, I'm going to support her. I absolutely will support her. Apparently, Trump is finalizing a meeting with Putin in Europe. It's going to take place in July when both of them are there for a NATO summit. Well, obviously, Putin is not there for the NATO summit, but they're going to get together and have a little chit-chat, get together. We don't know what the agenda is yet, but I imagine Syria is going to be a big part of it. Down in Papua New Guinea, apparently their prime minister has had to declare a 9-month-long state of emergency after rioters torched an airplane and other property in the country's Southern Highlands province. And apparently the issue here is that there was the election of South Highlands Province Governor William Powey seemed crooked. And the voters in that region submitted a petition calling for the election to be declared void over the obvious problems in the election process. And the court dismissed the petition, and people just started rioting. They take their democracy seriously down there in New Guinea. A group of U.S. congressmen is now urging Secretary of Defense Mattis to end the plan to sell the F-35 to Turkey over concerns that Turkey is cozying up to Russia in order to buy the S-400 anti-aircraft system, despite Washington's pressure. And Turkey's even talking about wanting to co-manufacture the S-500. And this is obviously going to be bad for everybody who works on the F-35 program, but it could be good for Turkey, because so far the F-35 is an unproven aircraft with a huge list of problems. And I'm sure that Turkey would probably be much more interested in buying some of the latest in Russian warplanes. Meanwhile, Trump is announcing the formation of the Space Force. And he's basically, it's going to be an independent service branch aimed at ensuring American supremacy in space. And he's out there pledging to revive the country's flagging efforts for the space program, return to the moon, and send a manned mission to Mars. And the president said space is a national security issue, saying he does not want China and Russia and the other countries leading us. So the space race is back. The space race is back, which might be good in terms of industrial development, but on the other hand, it's very rough on the nation's economies that are taking part in it. Remember, before he was assassinated, John F. Kennedy actually wanted to call off the race to the moon, and he wanted to send a joint U.S.-Soviet mission. Meanwhile, a lot of the British Royal Navy warships are spending a lot of time docked, and apparently the problem is their engines are temperature sensitive. The issue is that these ships have been designed to operate primarily in the North Atlantic, where there's plenty of cold water for cooling. And when they're operating down there in the Middle East, where the water is much warmer, the cooling is less efficient, and the engines are developing all kinds of problems. And there's a lot of ships, the engines have been damaged to the point where they can't leave port. We're going to take another break for commercials, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And so we're talking, again, another example about how these very expensive modern weapons are really just overpriced junk, at least produced here in the West by the military-industrial complex, which Britain has the same problem. And we're talking about how there's this temperature sensitivity issue with the engines. And the 6 Type 45 guided missile destroyers, which comprise the backbone of the Royal Navy, spent the majority of 2017 at the dock awaiting an expensive refit, which is only expected to begin in 2020. That's pretty bad. All right, let's talk about our domestic political situation here. And the Senate committee hearing is still going on. And Horowitz very clearly is trying to soft pedal this and say, well, we found some bad stuff, but we don't, So the Inspector's General Office is where scandals go to die or to disappear here. Everybody was expecting Horowitz to come on out with a report that was really going to drop a bomb on crooked Hillary and slippery Comey. It's unfortunately coming up short, but there are still questions raised by the report. And part of it is how many people at senior levels knew that Hillary Clinton was mishandling classified information and yet gave them a free pass from any kind of a serious investigation and prosecution. Now, this is coming from Charles Ortel. This is the Wall Street analyst and investigative journalist who's been conducting a private inquiry into the alleged fraud of the Clinton Foundation. So here we have a situation where the government is steadfastly saying there's no scandal, there's no scandal, there's no scandal. And it's left up to private citizens and organizations like Charles Ortel and Judicial Watch and Freedom Watch and Republic Broadcasting to basically dig at the facts and bring it all out to the American people. Now, Chris Farrell of Judicial Watch was on the Lou Dobbs show and said that one of the things the IG report shows is that Obama ran an FBI operation against Trump. And Trump doesn't want to call for Comey to be locked up, but he's certainly labeling him a criminal. And the content of the Inspector General report reinforces that, as well as exonerating Trump for firing Comey. Comey was clearly incompetent. Not incompetent, insubordinate. And he wasn't doing the job he's supposed to be doing, which is to investigate these crimes, not bury them. Okay, we're going to take a phone call from Bob in Illinois. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. What was it, about 20 years ago, 30, that Israel adopted the Star of David as their flag of choice or whatever? But
No. That goes right back to the beginning. That goes right back to the beginning. It actually, it's basically a copy of one of their prayer shawls. And the symbolism of the prayer shawl is the Star of David, and then the two stripes at top and bottom represent the Nile and the Euphrates. And when they were searching around for a flag for Israel, they just said, well, we've already got this, this nice little banner here from Judaism, and that's where it came from.
Well, yeah, but I don't think that was originally 7 candles or whatever.
You're talking about the menorah. I don't think Israel has ever had any other flag since it was recognized as a nation. I'm pretty sure it's always been the Star of David and the two blue stripes. Okay. We lost Bob. All right, let's go to David in San Francisco. Aloha, David. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, hey, Michael. That wasn't a bad answer regarding that flag, but, it's kind of interesting. I heard once that there are very Orthodox Jews that don't believe that Israel should exist.
Yes.
Because to say that a certain portion of God's green earth is sacred means that the rest of the earth is not sacred. And it's kind of like the Amish or the Mennonites here in America that can't abide, a flag, for example. That's rendering, paying homage to a graven image. So to say that some part of the rest of the earth, or 99% of the earth is not sacred, is not part of God's green earth, and that only a certain part is blessed, means that God is renouncing the most of the earth. And it's kind of profound because, these Zionists are not really accurately, living up to the tenets. You can hardly find any of the 10 Commandments that they abide by.
Well, again, and I don't mean to cut you off because I want to get back to the IG report here. When I was married to my first wife, who is Ashkenazi, she told me the 10 Commandments were only supposed to apply to fellow Jews, and everybody else was fair game. And I thought she was pulling my ankle. Anyway, listen, David, thanks an awful lot. I really do want to stay focused on the IG, and I want to go back to the IG report because there's a lot of stuff coming on out that, and I have no idea why all of a sudden people are calling in about the flag of Israel and everything, because it's certainly not a hot topic today. All right, getting on back to the Inspector General report coming out of sarahcarter.com. As you know, former FBI Director Comey was blasted by this Inspector General report, and basically finding that FBI agents from Comey down were willing to damage the Trump presidency. They were willing to attack the institution of the presidency in their bias. And there was bias. The IG report says clearly there was an animus and a bias at present, and the fact that they're out there saying we can't prove that the bias influenced their decisions, they can't prove the opposite either. They can't prove that there was no bias, no influence at all. You can't prove a negative here. So it is a mess here. Now, there's a very interesting report over at Zero Hedge, and it's talking about how one of the things that is coming out from the report, overall, the takeaways. This report on the FBI and Clinton does confirm once again, secrecy threatens democracy. And Hillary Clinton effectively exempted herself from the Freedom of Information Act. The State Department ignored 17 Freedom of Information Act requests for her emails prior to 2014 and insists it requires 75 years to disclose emails of Clinton's top aides. And a federal judge and the State Department Inspector General are slamming the stonewalling. And that's exactly what it is. Now, Clinton's private email server was not publicly disclosed until she received a congressional subpoena in 2015. A few months later, the FBI Counterintelligence Division opened a criminal investigation of the potential unauthorized storage of classified information on an unauthorized system. This is counterintelligence here. So I'm not the only one who's thinking, was there an espionage operation centered on that email server? Let's take another phone call. Andy in Texas. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, I appreciate taking my phone call. No, I'm sitting here watching this live on Newsmax. I mean, it's been on for hours now with this Michael Horowitz and that Christopher Wray. And these guys are buttering the toast like, I mean, the Clintons, they've got something on everybody. You've been saying it. They got something on everybody, and so everybody's buttering their toast with a plastic knife, hoping not to break that damn thing by spreading it so thin. I don't understand what's going on. I mean, why can't the American people win anything against these Clintons? We can't win nothing. These people are protected people. I mean, this just shows you how deep this thing goes.
Yes.
That these people have been planning this stuff forever. And now all of a sudden we're finally getting to the brisk of what's really going on. And they're hiding every little anecdote, every little thing that could possibly wake the people up. They're hiding it. And, you know, I'm actually surprised that Newsmax is showing this. Yeah, no, I'm actually surprised that Newsmax is showing this live right now. It's not on any other channel.
It's on Fox News right now.
Oh.
That's where I'm watching it.
Was that?
Yeah, I'm watching it on Fox News. And
doesn't it just curdle your stomach?
Well, yeah. I mean, absolutely it does. But to get back to your earlier question about the Clintons have been at the core of a lot of nasty CIA skullduggery going all the way back to Arkansas in the 1980s. When the CIA was running a highly illegal gun and drug smuggling operation down to Nicaragua and back up to Arkansas under the watchful eyes of then Governor Bill Clinton. And they were taking these guns down to the Nicaraguan Contras. They were funding it all with tons of cocaine that were flown back into the United States along the CIA's cocaine airways, if you will, air cocaine. And the corruption that has bloomed from them has grown and grown and grown until it includes the Clinton Foundation and what they did to Haiti. There was the 1996 Chinagate scandal where U.S. secrets were being allowed out to China and Chinese money came into the Bill Clinton re-election campaign. And now we have this story right now. And if any part of it breaks, if anybody goes public with any of it, and the American people start to wake up, there won't be any way to contain the damage. It's all going to unravel. Government-sanctioned drug running, assassinations, treason and betrayal by the highest officials in the land. They're all going to lose their jobs. Our government right now is actually very fragile between the overstressed economy and the general distrust the American public have for it. A massive scandal on that scale, a serving Secretary of State committing espionage against the United States government, using that weak email server to deliver the secrets and that foundation to collect and launder the money. That's a scandal that could bring the entire government crashing down. And that's why they're all protecting her. They don't like her. They don't like Bill Clinton. In fact, they're all suffering Clinton fatigue. They wish they would just go away. But what they're protecting is their own job. Because if this blows wide open, there isn't going to be anybody inside the Beltway who's going to be trusted to be in the government by the American people ever again.
Well, hey, Mike, this is really getting to a point because those of us who know, and there's more and more people each day, thanks to people like yourself and RBN and other nations or other stations and stuff. People are becoming aware to this stuff. And, you know, I've been aware to this for several years now, at least 11 or 12 years now, that I've been trying to get this information out. And thank God I found RBN about 6 years ago. I mean, you guys, I was like, wow, somebody really is paying attention. And no, I listened to you when you were on GCN and stuff. I didn't like the format you had. They took too many commercials out of your time and stuff. And you've got, 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, and a couple of small segments in each hour. And so things are working out great, but you're able to get your message out there. But we're sitting here looking at our country being stolen from us and people lying under oath. I mean, this guy from Facebook didn't get in trouble for lying to Congress because he wasn't under oath. But he did lie to them about how these people were collecting our information. I'm not on Facebook, so it doesn't bother me. But, I mean, all of this stuff that's going on, every bit of this stuff that's going on,
Yes.
in this nation is so secretive. They're keeping it from us, and they're not giving us a venue to find out how it is. And so when we hear it from you, the first-time listener to your program is going to be like, "Oh, this guy's crazy. He's out. He's off the wall." No, our government's not doing that, you know. And then you have to kind of bring them back in to listen to you. So, but this is just absolutely crazy, Mike. There's no way that we have a future in this country with people like this running our country.
No, they're going to run it into the ground or off a cliff, whatever your favorite metaphor is. We're heading for a Soviet Union-style collapse, and I'm seeing more and more people writing, especially in the foreign press, that they think that's exactly the future for the United States.
Well, how do we just survive these lies? Like I'm still watching this Newsmax, this live Justice Department, Horowitz and Knucklehead. They're just patty caking over everything that's going on in this country, and oh no, this that. No, come on, where are the truth tellers? Mike, where are they?
Well, they're probably, the truth tellers turn out to be dealt with the way Seth Rich was dealt with. And somebody just sent me an email here saying the reason all these people are in there soft pedaling this and protecting the Clintons is they don't want to wind up on the Clinton dead body list.
Exactly. All right. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for your time.
Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, Trey Gowdy, he seems to blow hot and cold, and a lot of people were wondering what went wrong when Trey Gowdy was out there saying that it was appropriate for the FBI to be spying on the Trump campaign. Of course, now we know from the IG report that the FBI was engaged in much more than just spying. But Trey Gowdy is now out there talking tough in his role as House Oversight Chairman, and he's saying that he's ready to start playing tough with the Department of Justice and the FBI, saying that they have got to start providing these documents. They have to comply with congressional subpoenas. And if they don't, they'll be hit with the full panoply of constitutional weapons to get the documents that they want to see. And then Gowdy is saying he doesn't want the drama, he wants the documents. Well, there's a good way to start getting those documents, and that's to have Donald Trump start firing some of these higher-ups and promote. And go to the subordinate and say, are you going to turn over the documents? No, you're not promoted. Are you going to turn over the documents? No. Will you turn over the documents? Yes. Okay, you're the new boss of the Department of Justice, or you're the new boss of the FBI. You have 1 week to provide the documents, or you're going to be fired too. All right, we're going to take another commercial break here. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And I'm watching the Senate committee hearing. And obviously, while I'm doing the radio show, I can't be paying attention to that. But on the commercial breaks, I'm reading the closed captioning. And already I'm saying, I don't recall. They're talking about Podesta's communications. No, we didn't look at this. We didn't. The whole summation that I'm getting here is that this was not really all that thorough an investigation. But there was so much wrongdoing that they couldn't come back and say, we didn't find anything. But we do know that Horowitz was put under tremendous pressure to soften the impact of this report, to save the reputation of the Department of Justice and the FBI, which, let's be honest, those are in the trash can right now. All right, let's take another phone call. Mark in North Carolina. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, I was watching a little bit when I was at the gym before, but it was kind of boring because nothing new. We know what's really going on, and we know they're going to try to whitewash this Congress because they've all got so much to hide. It reminds me of a couple of things. One, I recorded, I once again recorded Bill the Messenger about the late, great true news reporter, Gary Webb, and his destruction. His first is his professional destruction, and then his murder by the CIA. And I also watched another show on the American Hero Channel about Waco. I'd recorded that about a week ago.
Yes.
And David Koresh. And I know you and me differ. You think that the ATF shot each other. I don't think so. I think they'd like you to believe that. I think the deep state is very worried when they look at this, because in the beginning, the ATF was not only defeated, not only did a number of their agents were killed and wounded, but they were their attack was totally broken and they were destroyed. They ran in fear.
Okay, Mark. Okay.
Yeah.
Something you may not remember about Waco. Those ATF agents who were actually killed at Waco had just transferred in from the Secret Service Protective Detail.
Yeah, I know. I heard that before too.
So I think they used Waco to get rid of these individuals with some inconvenient information. Anyway, Mark, I want to come on back. I want to come on back and get back to the Inspector General report, okay? So thanks an awful lot, and we're going to let you go. Okay, so we're looking at all of this grandstanding and talking, and of course they drag the hearing out so that people get bored and they drift and they stop paying attention because they're having to go through the motions. The American people are demanding something get done about the very obvious misbehavior of top government officials. And so they have to go through the motions. But the deep state doesn't want anything to change. Anyway, we're going to take a break for station identification. More about the IG report when we come back from these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. So there are two takeaways from the Inspector General report. And the first is that the FBI was interfering in the 2016 election. They tampered with the election by tampering with Trump's campaign. It wasn't the Russians, it was the FBI. The second takeaway is that the investigation into Hillary's private email server was, for lack of a better word, botched. And it needs a do-over. The American people need to demand that there be a full and proper investigation of exactly what was going on with that email server and whether it was part of the espionage ring that we already know was being run inside the Congress by the Aiea brothers. And that is, I think that's really at the core of what everybody is trying to protect. All right, let's take a phone call here. James in Charlotte, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, Mike?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes, you're on the air.
Oh, okay. Wasn't sure you were there. Yeah, just one thing. I had heard something, some talk here and there. I'm not so sure how reliable it is about the congressional committees getting access to, like, the original draft of the IG report. Now, is there such a thing, or has that been shredded, or or is just the report they get all they're going to get?
Yeah, the IG report, 500 pages, that's all they're going to get. I don't know that there is a legal mechanism to go back in and peek over Horowitz's shoulder. Now, obviously, certain selected individuals got an advance copy, which is what prompted all the pressure on Horowitz. But these advance copies, I would imagine that, yeah, they haven't been disposed of now.
That was just what I was curious of, whether or not, there would be any kind of way to determine the extent to which the final report had been cleaned or expurgated or whatever you want to call it.
Well, I imagine by quite a bit here. Again, for the IG to come on out and say specifically they found no proof that political bias influenced any decisions, and then in the hearings admit they really didn't examine all the decisions for that, shows us that, yeah, the fix is in. They're trying to save the reputation of the Department of Justice. They're trying to save the reputation of the FBI. Good luck on that one. And so I haven't seen this much weaving and dodging in a congressional hearing since the Iran-Contra hearings.
Yeah. Well, maybe they can tease something out, or maybe somehow get the guy catch him in a lie or something. But you never know. I'd love to have a copy of the original draft just to see what the difference would be.
I would too. No question about that. But I imagine for very obvious reasons, we'll never see that.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go here. Now, as you know, the judge overseeing the Paul Manafort case revoked his house arrest and threw him in prison, and was clearly timed to pull attention away from the release of the IG report. And it turns out this same judge is the one who cleared Hillary Clinton in the Benghazi case, saying that she was not responsible for the deaths of 4 American servicemen in Benghazi back in 2012, even though she had refused a request from that consulate for increased security. So it's the same guy, Amy Berman Jackson, who's also a past Bill Clinton donor and federal judge. She threw out the lawsuit filed by Patricia Smith and Charles Woods. All right, let's take another phone call. Ed in Florida. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. There was a mass shooting in New Jersey on Sunday, I believe. 20 injured, 1 killed. Happened in Trenton, which used to be a nice town 30 years ago. Now it's pretty much ghetto.
Well, this used to be a nice country 30 years ago, and now it's pretty much a ghetto. From sea to shining sea.
Oh, yeah. My question is, where's the outcry coming from the left concerning gun control? Why aren't they screaming that we need to ban all these weapons of mass murder, where we had just had 22 people shot and 1 murdered? I don't hear it because, you know why? Because it happened in an inner city and they're black folks. That's why.
Oh, I was about to say, it all depends on who the shooter is. And there may not have been enough deaths right now in these inner cities, especially Democratic strongholds. Murder rates are sky high. There's shootings happening all the time. And,
yep.
The news is very selective. It's filtered. If we can use it for our agenda, it goes on the corporate media. If we can't use it for our agenda, then nobody will see it. Anyway, thank you, Ed. We're going to let you go. We're going to do a shout out to our honor affiliates who are just now rejoining our network. Now, apparently, as part of his special counsel duties, Robert Mueller was investigating Trump's advisor, George Papadopoulos, as an unregistered agent of Israel, and threatened to charge Papadopoulos. And the special prosecutor's office claimed to have evidence that Papadopoulos had worked on behalf of Israel without registering as a foreign agent. Now, that was definitely a bad thing to do, okay? When you work for any foreign government representing their interests, you are supposed to register as a foreign agent. And unfortunately, in this country, people who work for Israel very often skip on that one. I mean, people at AIPAC, for example, they're not required to register as a foreign agent. But that being said, my concern here is that's not what Mueller's investigation was supposed to be about. It was supposed to be about Trump and Russia collusion. And 18 months on and all kinds of millions of dollars spent, they don't have anything. So Mueller is out there just on a fishing expedition, trying to find something, anything that he can use to whittle away at the Trump presidency. And that's not law enforcement, that's politics, and it's dirty politics as well. Now, Alan Dershowitz is wagging his finger collectively at the corporate media, and for that matter, the liberal establishment, for basically having declared victory in the Paul Manafort case before he's had a hearing or a trial or been able to present any evidence. And Dershowitz says there's something wrong with the system that basically not only assumes guilt, but proclaims it. And he's absolutely right about that. There's something hideously wrong. And we have seen that more than just with Manafort. When Mueller indicted those Russians, everybody just said, oh, they got to be guilty. That's the Trump-Russia collusion right there. And Mueller just figured they wouldn't bother showing up. The indictments would stand. And everybody would say, well, that's proof of guilt. Except in his case, the Russians did show up. And now he's in trouble because the lawyers for these Russians are saying that Mueller will not comply with the rules of discovery, which require prosecutors share with defense attorneys the evidence they have of wrongdoing. And Mueller might not have any. Now, according to the story coming out of Patriot Rising, there was a second FBI informant who tried to entrap the Trump campaign with a $2 million offer for dirt on Hillary Clinton. And Roger Stone and Michael Caputo is saying that this meeting Stone took in May of 2016 with a Russian appears to have been an FBI sting operation in hindsight. Following the reports that the Department of Justice and FBI used a longtime FBI CIA asset, Cambridge professor Stephen Halper, to perform espionage on the Trump campaign. They were trying to set the Trump campaign up. And it's hard to understand why they hate this man so much. He's given them pretty much everything they want. The only area in which there is still an ideological conflict, of course, nationalism versus globalism. And this late in the game, it may be they're trying to get rid of Trump before Trump scores a significant victory and starts to go after them. And right now, with this release of the IG report, Trump has the high ground. He's got the moral advantage. He was clearly correct to fire James Comey. And he should press his advantage home right now. It's time to get those presidential brass knuckles on and start cleaning house. And I think one of the reasons that Horowitz has spun his report to say no evidence of bias, Comey was insubordinate, but there was no bias, is because if there was bias influencing their decisions, and let's be honest, from the outside looking in, clearly there was, that's a fireable offense. So this IG report is being written to try and deny Donald Trump any good reasons to start firing top Department of Justice and FBI officials. The only problem being there that all these officials serve at the pleasure of the president, and he can fire them for whatever reason or no reason whenever he wants. Remember, Bill Clinton fired his head of the FBI the day before the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster. Think about that one for a while. Okay, Howie Carr is out there saying, you're sad, corrupt FBI now and forever. And when the Inspector General's report came on out, Trey Gowdy said, this is not the FBI I know. But Howie Carr is saying, Trey Gowdy is from South Carolina. I'm from Massachusetts. This is the FBI I know only too well. And was talking about some of the things that happened up there in Massachusetts, where the FBI had an informant who was a known murderer, and they let him go on killing because he was providing information inside organized crime. And that's the FBI. It's the FBI I know from back at the day the hippies took over Disneyland. It's the FBI I know from the framing of James Earl Ray. It's the FBI I know from back when the murder of Vincent Foster happened and they covered it up. That's the reality. Just forget the public image. They work hard on their public image. Look how hard they're trying to protect their public image now. But the image and the reality are completely different. The FBI is modern America's version of the Gestapo, there to enforce the will of the rulers. One other thing that the Inspector General report has in it is that the FBI found Clinton Foundation emails stored together with classified intelligence. Now, why is this important? Well, because Hillary Clinton insisted there was a firewall between the State Department and the Clinton Foundation so that there would be no pay for play. Well, we know now that there actually was. communications have surfaced showing that people who donated to the Clinton Foundation got favorable treatment from the State Department. They got weapons deals. And now we're finding out that there was no firewall at all, that foundation emails were stored together with classified State Department documents. It's just all one big mailbox here. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the economic news. As you know, Trump is piling more and more tariffs onto China, tens of billions of dollars worth, and China's retaliating, and everybody's getting sanction and tariff happy. Apparently, Marine Le Pen is asking the French government to start slapping duties on Germany's exports, because France's trade deficit with Germany is 17 billion euros. Meanwhile, the European Union has extended sanctions against Crimea for another 12 months. Everybody is sanctioning everybody left and right. Up in Canada, Trudeau has imposed retaliatory trade tariffs against the United States. So expect the price of maple syrup and Canadian bacon to go right through the roof here. And these sanctions, I imagine that George Soros has to realize he's got a big problem, because these sanction wars are driving countries apart at a time when Soros was trying to weld them together. I mean, you've got France and Germany getting ready for a sanctions war when the EU is already straining to come apart. And Soros has to just really be very unhappy about that. My heart bleeds for him. But apparently the Russian corporations are starting to abandon London and take the center of their activities back to Moscow. And the London Stock Exchange has suspended share trading of sanctioned energy conglomerate EN Plus Group, and other Russian firms are thinking of scrapping their stock listings in Great Britain and just go back to the Moscow Stock Exchange. Russia has dumped half of their treasury holdings. It's a huge amount, and it may be one of the reasons why the stock market did not have a deliriously happy day. In fact, right now, Russia holds less U.S. debt than Bermuda. Everybody's bailing on out. Morgan Stanley is sounding the alarm that we may see the tech bubble burst, with some of the news coming on out about poor sales for the iPhone 10, other issues like that. That could easily happen. Apparently, Tesla may miss its Model 3 targets yet again. Elon Musk is telling his employees that radical improvements are needed in the next 2 weeks if the firm is to hit its production goals. Well, Elon, I'm sorry, but 2 weeks is not enough time to significantly change the outcome. Now, Tesla is currently building a little more than 500 vehicles a day, but they need 700. But if you rush those things, mistakes get made. And nobody knows that better than British TV director Michael Morris, whose Tesla burst into flames spontaneously in Los Angeles. No accident, nothing got bumped, it's just all of a sudden burst into flames. And Tesla is saying it's investigating an extraordinarily unusual occurrence and still insists its electric vehicles are less likely to catch fire than fuel-powered ones. Maybe. Now, as you know, over the last several years, gold repatriation has become the fashion, and it's become a point of contention because a lot of countries entrusted their gold to U.S. bullion storage facilities such as J.P. Morgan and the New York Federal Reserve. And now they're having a little bit of difficulty getting them on out. If you'll remember, it all really started with Germany, who has a huge amount of gold on deposit in the vaults of the New York Federal Reserve. Now, the way this works is very simple. It's like a bank safety deposit box. You pay the bank a fee, and you put whatever you want in the safety deposit box, and they lock it up in their vault to keep it safe. So far, so good. So Germany wanted some of their gold bullion back, and the Federal Reserve started hemming and hawing and saying, well, it's going to take 3 years to start to get you your gold back. Germany had also asked for some of their gold back from the Bank of England. I'm sorry, the Bank of France. France said it will take 8 years, and then promptly invaded Mali, which is one of Africa's leading gold-producing nations. Germany finally started getting some of their gold back, and it turned out to be not the original bars that had been delivered, just new bars. And assays showed they weren't even as pure as the original ones. That's not the way it's supposed to work. That would be like going to the bank and to the safety deposit box, and you open it up, and there's some stuff in there that kind of sort of looks like what you put in, but you know it isn't. So because of that, more and more countries are trying to pull their gold from U.S. vaults. Turkey is the latest country to request their gold. They pulled out 220 tons of gold out of the U.S. Federal Reserve back in April. And Turkey has followed countries such as Germany, as I mentioned before, the Netherlands, Austria, Belgium, Russia, China, and Azerbaijan. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. And it appears that the Senate hearing has been recessed. I don't think it's over yet. And the Department of Homeland Security Secretary is out there saying, it's our duty to protect the American people. We take it very seriously, blah, blah, blah. So everybody's out there trying to polish their reputation, and you cannot do it. Too much has happened. Too much has gone down. You know, we had that caller on the line earlier who was saying, you know, people who come to my show for the first time, they're going to say, what a wacko and what a kook. And I don't think so, because this day and age, Americans have become very skeptical. And it's true, back when I started doing all of this almost a quarter of a century ago, a lot of people thought I was nuts. But it's been rather amazing and encouraging over the last couple of years to see this trickle of email coming on in, saying, I knew you back in North Hollywood and I thought you were crazy, and here everything you said was going to happen is happening. Getting on back to the issue of gold, down in Texas, that gold bullion depository has officially opened for business this week. And the creation of this new facility represents a power shift away from the federal government and big Wall Street banks, and sets a foundation to undermine the Federal Reserve's monopoly on money, which is why I believe this thing is going to be attacked. And somebody's going to try and break into it just to discredit it as quickly as they can. The Federal Reserve does not want to give up that monopoly on money. They have grown insanely rich, forcing you to use their currency loaned at interest. They've grown very rich since the end of World War II, forcing the rest of the world to use the Federal Reserve note loaned at interest. We're seeing another story coming on out from Sputnik News here. And apparently there is an academic paper from the University of Texas showing that there was a relationship between Tether and Bitcoin. And the concerns about that have been justified, because apparently last year's tremendous spike in Bitcoin's value was purposely engineered. Now, we talked about that last week, but I want to hit this point again. So one of the reasons why I steered clear of cryptocurrency, the potential for manipulation. And I was smelling tulips. What can I tell you? All right, so let's talk about immigration. And there was that issue last week of this ship with 600 immigrants that attempted to sail into Italy, and they were turned back. And of course, all the globalists immediately came down on Salvini saying, you know, how could you do that? Salvini said, because if I let in a ship with 600 refugees today, there'll be another ship tomorrow with 600 refugees, and another ship the day after that, and another ship the day after that. And so this refugee ship sailed around trying to find some way into Europe, and finally was accepted by Spain. They had to sail out the Straits of Gibraltar and up the coast. They went into Spain here. And to nobody's surprise, they have now been followed by at least 70 other ships full of African immigrants heading towards Spain. Imagine my shock. Things in Germany are really beginning to heat up, and one of the sparks was this Afghan child refugee who's now gone on trial in Germany for stabbing a 15-year-old girl to death after she broke off their relationship. Apparently just went to the store, bought himself a kitchen knife, and just stabbed her to death multiple times. And this has reminded everybody that this open border situation has brought in a lot of very violent, dangerous people. So the friction inside Germany is building to a head, and they're starting to call it the Bavarian Revolt. And the politicians from Bavaria are out there saying, we need to start turning some of these people back. And the Christian Social Union in Germany is out there saying it's time to stop the EU's Brexit bullying. And she could lose the entire coalition. In fact, the German Interior Minister Horst Seehofer came on out and said, I can't work with that woman. It's just impossible. Because they're trying to deal with the real world consequences of the open borders policy, and Merkel is still just caught up in this liberal fantasy of a one world government where we're all the same and we just hug and hug and hug. And it's not working out that way. And that's probably one of the biggest failures of liberalism, is they'll get these ideas into their head, not think them all the way through. They'll fall apart because the entire philosophical foundation of liberalism is based on an intellectual hoax. And then when it all does fall apart, the liberals refuse to take responsibility for it. It's somebody else's fault. But there's actual talk that Merkel could be gone in as little as a few weeks, end of the month. It's coming apart that fast. We got to take another break here for commercials. We got a caller waiting on the line, and we'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go right to the phones. Scott in Wisconsin. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. How you doing, brother? I remember talking to you about 9 years ago. I love you, brother. And I just want to talk about the mouse heading to the cheese, and I'll explain. Last night I was sitting back after I got the kids to bed, and then I saw an article on the web called Sick Stores. Sick, and it was from MoneyWise. And it's unbelievable, the stores that are closing this year. If I'm allowed, brother, to tell a couple of them.
Oh yeah, by all means.
Oh, okay, here we go. It's amazing. Subway. Listen to this: 500 stores closing this year. Subway. Ann Taylor Sisters, 547 stores closing in 2018. Rite Aid, that's a pharmacy.
Yes.
600 stores are closing. Toys R Us is the big one. Oh, that's so sad.
Yes.
735 stores are closing. How about Foot Locker? I remember Michael walking through the malls when I was a young kid. 110 stores closing. Best Buy Mobile, 250 stores closing. The list goes on and on, Michael. And, you know, I try to tell people this. They go, you can get a better deal on Amazon. It isn't that, Michael. We have not recovered since 9/11. And these people are living in a cocoon because they don't open up their eyes. And we have not recovered since then, brother. And I'd just like, thank you for taking my call, Mikey. And just, if you could speak to that matter for a little while. God bless you, brother.
Well, it's really recovering, or the non-recovery from the 2008 crash, the meltdown of the mortgage-backed security fraud. Plus, we have this push by corporate America to just shove wages and salaries down to the below a minimum living wage. I mean, everyone's arguing over $15 an hour, but in the United States right now, the average American needs $22 an hour just to have a simple apartment and food. We don't have anything left over to go to these shopping malls. And yes, Amazon is doing very well, but the online part of the consumer economy is still very, very small. And the reality is that all these stores like Sears and so forth are closing because they just don't have enough customers coming in and actually buying stuff. Claire and I will go down the hill to the shopping mall, and it'll be crowded and people are walking around, but you hardly see any shopping bags. And I think what's going on is they're walking around to sort of feel good that, you know, maybe they could buy something if they wanted to, but they're keeping that plastic in their wallets. And when the consumer economy really starts to collapse, it's going to take all these retail corporations with it. That could be the trigger that brings the whole thing down. It really could be.
You know, Michael, I love you, brother. I haven't talked to you. I hope your health and your wife is doing good. You're right on the mark, brother, because the reality is like you said, America's middle class has been gutted out and they're broke.
Yes.
That's the reality. Thank you for taking my call, Mikey. God bless you.
All right. Thanks an awful lot. And we're going to switch over to Steve Elkins. Steve, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, my wife and I were just talking, and on our drive back, I saw the same news you saw about Chancellor Merkel may be out. And I thought from the very beginning, when all the immigration was coming in and things were going so wrong in Europe, especially Germany, how in the hell did she get back in? Which I had to say it has to be voter fraud. And now it looks like she may be tossed out. So it evidently was election fraud, voter fraud that got her back in. Correct?
Well, it seems to be epidemic around the world here, and maybe if we all reacted to election fraud the way they're doing down in Papua New Guinea, the problem might start to recede. But another area in which Donald Trump has let the American people down was closing down his Election Integrity Commission and letting the Department of Homeland Security just check the voting machines to make sure they're secure.
Yeah, that's fraud. That's actually benefited both sides, and I don't know why he hasn't scrapped it. I don't think he's going to move on it by 2020, and he's just a one-term president. Hey, quick question for you here. On the U.S. territories, we have 16 U.S. territories, 5 are inhabited. There's been a big push. I've seen you down here in Florida about Puerto Rico. They're very angry that the United States didn't jump fast enough, and not enough money has trickled back into Puerto Rico to help them out with their problems.
Yep.
And there's also, I guess, a big push now from the Democrat side to end the territory of Puerto Rico and actually make it a state because they want to, of course, help boost their numbers for voting. But my question is, from the very beginning, what positive note would there be for having U.S. territories versus making them a state? Why are we in the business of U.S. territories? How did that all happen?
Well, it's a holdover from the colonial age here, and the aftermath of the wars and again, colonialism. The issue is that not everybody in the territories wants to be a part of the United States, and Hawaii went through that same issue. Back when they were going through the argument about being a state or not. And it was kind of ramrodded through because the United States government wanted Hawaii as the unsinkable battleship in the middle of the Pacific. But the people who actually lived here, for the most part, they did not want to become part of the United States. They wanted to go back to being an independent republic.
Right. Okay. Last but least, I noticed that Ron Howard was in the news, his quote saying, when was America great? And then probably going back right after World War II when manufacturing was, starting to pick back up again. Well, I was doing some shopping today, just clothes shopping, retail shopping there, and I noticed at the Kohl's department store, I was just curious, my wife and I, we walked around, surprised security didn't come down and ask what the heck we were doing, but we were flipping tags over and boxes over. We were trying to see actually how much in the Kohl's department store that was actually U.S. made, manufactured.
Yep.
And one thing in the retail department, but we came up with Bangladesh, Honduras, Guatemala, Egypt, Jordan, Mexico, Thailand, China, of course, Vietnam. All these countries were making all your garments, all your shirts, your shoes.
Yep.
It was amazing. So I started thinking about make this America great again. We have no manufacturing. We're taking on a giant here, China, in a trade dispute, a trade war, when we don't make anything, and that was just in the clothing department, in the shoes department. I did notice some other tools. Black & Decker is not made in the United States, which I didn't know. Cuisinart, many other companies I thought might be U.S. made, manufactured, are not made in this country at all. And I'm thinking we're taking on a giant here, and we don't make anything.
No, we don't.
It's amazing.
No, we don't. At the end of World War II, there were 37 American companies making TV sets. Today, there are none. The so-called American TV brands merely license their trademark to foreign manufacturers. And not only is that obviously bad for the trade imbalance, but it's another reason why our consumer economy is in serious, serious trouble, because those manufacturing jobs did pay much better. But they're all offshored in the quest for higher corporate profits, and they're on a dead-end path. They can't sustain this. This is not an economy that can function smoothly. It's an economy that is headed to a point where the wealth inequality is just going to break it all apart.
Yeah. This is I mean, we can't win a trade war. We cannot win a trade war. And this is, I believe that something should be done. But again, here's a problem when you refuse to enforce your own laws, and all this outsourcing that happened back in the 70s and 80s created this issue. Now that we're all saying, well, we need to turn it around now. I don't know how. I don't know how we're going to turn this around and bring back the manufacturing. I have no idea how this could possibly happen.
Well, obviously, the people who've got all the money right now are not going to surrender it easily. I think we're going to have to go through a Soviet Union-style collapse and just basically hit the reset button and start over, where the labor of the American people builds the economic strength of the country, and hopefully government is there to try and keep the money junkies from figuring out ways to steal it.
That's it, Mike. Hey, thanks. Great show.
All right, thanks an awful lot here, and the phone lines are now open. Okay, getting on back to Angela Merkel. Apparently, faced with this Bavarian revolt, if you will, they've given her 2 weeks to solve the migrant crisis. And basically, the solution in terms of these Eurosceptic German parties, the anti-open border parties, is for Angela Merkel to get the other countries in Europe to start accepting more refugees and balance it out, a Europe-wide agreement. She's not going to get that because there are too many of the other European Union nations that are starting to shut the borders, like Italy and Poland and Hungary. And this is all going to come apart, and it could devolve literally into a civil war inside Europe between the indigenous population and all these refugees, most of whom seem to be military-age young men. Now, if Merkel comes crashing down, it's expected that Germany would swing hard right politically, and that could be the trigger of an uncontrollable breakup of the European Union. So Soros is already over there with duct tape trying to wrap it all back together again. Merkel and Macron are going to have a meeting. Emmanuel Macron is going to Germany for crunch talks on the Eurozone reforms, but in all probability, the migrant crisis is going to dominate the conversation because France also has got way too many, and there's more coming. They're just pouring across the border here. Nigel Farage came out on his radio show and said, Merkel is the past, Salvini is the future, which is his way of saying open borders it has had its course. And restoring sane border policy, that's the next thing here. And I was watching this press conference by the Secretary of Homeland Security and talking about there does have to be a change because what's going on isn't working. Now, everybody's trying to say Trump is being cruel and Trump is being mean because of this child separation policy. That actually was in place before Trump was even elected. It goes back to the Obama administration here. But the reality is there is an expected 70,000 kids that will show up on our borders this year. But here is something you need to keep in mind. They're not all refugees. A lot of them are drug mules. And these young kids who are isolated from home, they're already separated from their parents. They're recruited by the drug traffickers. They give them a backpack full of marijuana and tell them where to cross the border. They're met by somebody who takes the marijuana, and that's it. And they're all of a sudden inside the United States. So this is tangled up with the drug traffic as well. All right, let's take a phone call. Veronica in Iowa. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I was a small business owner, and I would like to discuss that minimum wage issue. We don't have a minimum wage problem. We have a money problem. In 1964, the minimum wage was 5 silver quarters. In 2016, 5 silver quarters had a melt value of $15.55. If I were still in business and they forced me to pay a wage of $15 an hour, I would have to raise all of my prices in order to meet that wage. Everything goes up. Every time minimum wage goes up, all the prices go up. It's the money has to come from somewhere. There's no magic unicorn. All of my products are going to go up. Everything goes up, and then you're just back in the same boat.
Yeah.
It's not.
It's this treadmill.
Wages are going to answer anything. We need to fix our money.
No, we need to basically get the money circulating back down into throughout the whole economy, and not just shoved up at the top by the money junkies, or such vast sums of money being siphoned out of our society, both by the Federal Reserve, who qualifies the money junkies, and by the costs of the war. I mean, that's why there isn't any money left for Americans to use to try and build businesses or build houses or build a better life for themselves. We're being driven down into abject poverty right now.
Oh, you bet. And I'm a senior citizen now, and my health tanked. I'm on disability, and boy, am I feeling it. I'm on the verge of losing my home at this point, and that's pretty scary stuff.
I know.
But, the Federal Reserve is just way, way out of control, and that's the problem, If we want a living wage for everybody again, then I'm with Ron Paul on it. Where the Federal Reserve is concerned, they need to be audited, and Congress could get rid of them, but won't.
Yeah, Congress can
like
revoke the charter.
Out,
Congress can revoke the charter with the Federal Reserve whenever they want to, but the Federal Reserve are very generous donors to congressional campaigns. Our government sold us out. It's basically what it is. Now, the way our country was first set up, you had the government was supposed to be an arbiter between the needs of the nation as a whole and the desires and greeds of the ultra-rich, and was supposed to try and keep the two in balance in order to prolong the operation of the economy. But when the government goes over on the side of the money junkies and it's grab, 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 you don't need to be an economic PhD to understand at some point the system will lock up, and we're starting to see that with the retail Mageddon, with people who are losing their homes, with people who are literally having to choose whether they're going to pay the rent or buy food from day to day. That's how bad it is out there.
It is. It really, really is. And speaking of wars, your video, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars.
Yes.
Is superior. I think I've shared that possibly around 300 times. So I want to give you a pat on the back for that one. That is just spectacular.
Well, thank you very much. But, up on the top of the main page, in that little gray menu box, there is the article version of All Wars Are Banker Wars, and there's actually even more information in there than was inside the video. So you might want to take a peek at that.
I will. Thank you so much.
All right, Veronica, thank you for the phone call. We got to let you go for a commercial break, and we will be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're still talking about immigration. And interestingly enough, Democratic Texas Representative Henry Cuellar is admitting that the Obama administration attempted to cover up the child migrant crisis occurring at the southern border. So this has been going on long before Trump showed up. The Democrats are trying to tarnish Trump with it. Oh, how cruel could he be? It didn't start with him. It was running under the Obama administration. And apparently there were a lot of abuses going on down there. Now, interestingly enough, the Catholic Bishops' Conference in Florida is calling on Catholics to disobey Trump immigration policies, and it threatens canonical punishment. I guess they hit you upside of the head with a canonical or something like that. But not only is this incitement to insurrection, at least as far as Title VIII is concerned, I think this kind of political activism violates the terms of the church's tax-exempt status. And let's not forget, the ultimate blame rests for this debacle, not with Donald Trump, but with the people who opened up the borders in the first place, the globalists, the open border people, and all those people choosing to come across that border illegally. It's really their fault. That's where the blame lies. Now, interestingly enough, even as people are screaming about Donald Trump's wall along the Mexican border, Turkey has finished building a massive wall, 764 kilometers along their border with Syria. It's paid for with European Union funds, which says that somebody in Europe is looking to try and slow down this mass of refugees pouring out of the Mideast, heading for Europe. Now, Kathy Griffin is back in the news. I think she's a fading star, and she's still trying to prove that she's relevant because Melania Trump had come on out with an observation that she hated to see children separated from their families, and how she hopes both sides of the aisle can come together to achieve successful immigration reform. She believes that we need to be a country that follows all laws, but also a country that governs with heart, which I think that's great. It's a perfect sentiment, I think. Kathy Griffin just unleashed on a profanity-laced tirade saying, blank you, Melanie, and by the way, it's Melania, you know darn well your husband can end this immediately, you feckless, complicit piece of, and it ends there. Now, none of this is productive, whether it's Kathy Griffin or Robert De Niro. It's just making noise for the sake of noise and basically throwing a tantrum because you're not getting what you want, which is open borders and more democratic voters. But Melania Trump is right. We do have to show compassion, but we have to show compassion for the American people first. And then when we have something left over, we can reach out to the rest of the world. But let us enforce the existing Title VIII laws. Makes perfect sense to me. We'll be right back after station identification. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. Now, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection has a program called Sentry, which is a low-risk traveler program. You can get this Sentry card, and you have to pass a background and security check, and you have a face-to-face interview, and they will say that you are a low-risk trusted traveler. You may join the program, and you get a little card, which allows you to expedite your border crossing in and out of the United States by using the Sentry kiosks. And the kiosks are located at the southern land border between Mexico and the United States. And they just caught one of these Sentry card holders smuggling $364,000 worth of cocaine from Mexico into the United States in his spare tire. So another wonderful, highly effective U.S. government program there. All right, let's get on to science and health issues. We've got a lot to talk about. We have, in the past, pointed the finger at prescription psychiatric medication as leading to serious mental aberrations. Suicide, violence, domestic abuse, road rage, who knows? Nobody's really done a study because the big pharmaceutical corporations don't want things like that being studied. But studies are going on anyway, and over at the Organic Prepper, they're quoting a new study showing that more than 200 prescription and over-the-counter medications actually cause depression, including suicidal thoughts. And it's a big, long list. It's posted to, it's a link to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com. You might want to go through it and look at those medications to see if you're taking them. And so what do the pharmaceutical companies do when the medicine they give you causes you depression? They sell you an antidepressant. It's this treadmill. And I read somewhere that once you get caught on that prescription medicine treadmill, the average number of pill bottles you will have in your medicine cabinet is going to be 12. Now, you remember back in, I think it was 2009, they had the big scare, the when pigs fly flu. It was a bird flu that had pig crossover genes in it. And it was just hailed as this huge, scary thing. It was going to be a slate wiper, and you've got to buy and stockpile Tamiflu. And Roche Pharmaceuticals made a huge amount of money. And in the end, the when pigs fly flu turned out to be much less severe than the normal seasonal flu. Now, maybe they're trying to boost their profits again, or maybe not, but I have to look at this with a little bit of caution, because the way this headline is written, it's sensationalistic. They're trying to scare you. And they're talking about a new strain of the deadly bird flu dubbed Disease X by the World Health Organization. Has killed hundreds of people in China and is just 3 mutations away from becoming transmissible between humans, according to experts. Now, this strain, which is called H7N9, circulates in poultry and has killed 623 people out of 1,625 infected in China. That means a little less than half, 38.3%. And this was first identified in China in 2013, but all of a sudden it's emerged as a serious threat seemingly overnight. And we're getting a warning from Professor Jonathan Van Tam, Deputy Chief Medical Officer for Great Britain, told the Telegraph that H7N9 could cause a global outbreak. Well, again, going back to the when pigs fly flu, is this really a serious threat, or is it another marketing campaign? But again, this article is written to scare people. And the Telegraph goes on to quote, the World Health Organization is saying that N7N9 is an unusually dangerous virus for humans, one of the most lethal influenza viruses that we've seen so far. But before you run on down to your local drugstore and ask for that vaccine jab, you need to look at this last report issued in 2013 by the Department of Justice, meaning the vaccine court, for compensation made by the Health and Human Services for people injured or killed by vaccines, was released in December 2013. There were 139 claims settled during this time period, with 70 of them being compensated. And basically, using this information, it was determined that of all the vaccines that are out there, the flu vaccine is the most dangerous. So what do? Do you get the flu vaccine and risk being injured by that? Or do you take the chance that you're never going to eat a Chinese bird? Story that came on out of TruthStream Media. This is a flashback. Gardasil victims awarded nearly $6 million because of the damage that causes. We're going to do a shout out now to our on-air affiliates who are just now rejoining the network. Okay, the American Medical Association, along with being out there promoting that you buy everything that they've got to sell, supposedly was founded to promote the American medical community, and it's now wading into one of the major political battles of our day, gun control. And they're trying to couch this gun grab with the idea that, well, this is now a serious medical crisis, or a public health crisis, and therefore we can do away with the Second Amendment. Now, their timing is a little bit off here, because there was an incident up in this Walmart in Washington where there was an armed shooter legally carrying his gun, and he thwarted a potential mass shooting by killing the gunman after the gunman opened fire at a Walmart and injured 2. And it's another reminder that the police are never there in time to thwart a crime. They'll let the crime happen and then stand around and try and look relevant. And the only way you stop a bad person with a gun is a good person with a gun. And there are always going to be bad people. And there is no way you can confiscate the guns. I mean, look at Chicago. Toughest gun laws in the country, and look at the homicide rate. Now, down in Australia, they had another incident called the Margaret River Massacre, where a grandfather shot 4 children and then killed himself. And yes, he was on prescription antidepressants. We're drugging ourselves crazy with these medications. We really are. Now, do you remember a few years ago there was that Volkswagen scandal where they rigged the car's software for the engine so that it could tell the difference between when it was driving and when it was undergoing a smog check? And during the smog check, the engine would run one way, and when it was being driven, it would run a different way to give the driver a more positive driving experience, because people do like to feel the car is going to respond when they put the pedal down. Well, unlike the United States, where corporate executives are pretty much immune for anything that they do, Munich prosecutors have arrested the CEO of Audi, Robert Stradler, who was also a member of parent company Volkswagen's board, out of concerns he might try and suppress evidence in this case. This has been going on for 3 years. And the arrest comes a month after Audi admitted that another 60,000 A6 and A7 models with diesel engines could have what's politely described a software emissions issue, meaning the software was rigged to get around the clean air requirements. And it comes 2 months after Volkswagen CEO Matthias Müller stepped down and was replaced by Herbert Diess, formerly the CEO of the company's core Volkswagen unit. So big shakeup over there. Now here's an interesting little story. You remember the Grenfell fire and disaster, and a lot of people were screaming about, first of all, the lack of sprinklers in the building, the lack of adequate fire escapes, and this cladding, which turned out to be highly flammable. And the cladding was there to keep the insulation on the outside of the building. And a lot of people are starting to say, why did they put the insulation on the outside of the building? Well, it turns out it was a refurbishment and a refit that was mandated so that the building would meet carbon targets, because we've got to fight human-caused global warming. And that was it. They said, oh, this building is leaking too much heat. We've got to put up this insulation. We've got to put the cladding on it to keep the insulation in place. And the cladding turned out to be flammable. So those poor people. Apparently, a hacker has breached the Syscoin GitHub account, and they have replaced the official Windows client with a version that contains malware. Now, the poisoned Syscon Windows client contained Archege Steal, a malware strain specializing in dumping and stealing passwords and wallet private keys. This malware is also detected as Trojan Win32 Fury B !CL. Syscoin developers are now warning Syscoin users who downloaded version 3.0.4.1 of the Syscoin client between June 9th of this year and June 13th of this year, their systems might be infected with malware. Here malware, there malware, everywhere malware. By the way, I was trying to clean out my iPhone's phone directory because it keeps a record of all your calls, and after a while there's a lot of them. And I noticed I'm actually getting more calls from scammers than anything else on my phone. It's the age of the scam. It's the age of the cyber theft. And nobody wants to do anything about it. I mean, when caller ID came along, everybody thought that was great. I'm going to know who's calling me. Au contraire, because the consumer caller ID can be hacked and altered so that you don't get to know who's calling you if they don't want you to know it. Only the police have access to that unchangeable caller ID. Well, I'm sorry, but if somebody doesn't want me to know who they are, don't call me at all. That's my response to that. It's time for we consumers to have a little bit more protection against these scammers and against these cyber criminals who seem to be running rampant all over us like it's open season on the American people. Now, remember when Windows 10 came on out, and one of the things that Windows was pushing was the improved security features that made it harder for rootkits to get a foothold on Microsoft's new operating system. Here we are 3 years later, and security researchers from Romania-based antivirus vendor Bitdefender have detailed the operations of an adware strain named Zakinjo that uses a rootkit component to gain persistence across OS reinstalls. Meaning once you've got it, even reinstalling the operating system won't get rid of it. Researchers say that 90% of all Zakinjo's recent victims are Windows 10 users, showing that the crooks intentionally designed their product against Microsoft's latest operating system. By the way, somebody did some number crunching and is now refuting Microsoft's claim that Windows 10 now accounts for half of all operating systems on Windows computers, and they said it's actually closer to 20. And again, I've got this little Windows 10 machine here, gave it an honest try here, and I was trying to make it do something, and it was slow and sluggish and couldn't get anything to work. And then I stumbled quite by accident across a little memo, if you will, advice, a tip from Microsoft, that when you first get a Windows 10 computer and you power it up, you leave it on for 24 hours because that's how long it takes for all of the various patches and updates and everything to download. And because I only turned this machine on for a few minutes every time I worked with it, it wasn't getting to do the installs. And so I let it sit for 24 hours, and yes, it's running faster, but I still don't know what I can actually do with it. And I'm probably going to swap it in to my little Twitch audio chain here because that's about all it's really good for. Going to go back to my Windows 7, and I miss XP, I really do. There is a new mystery bot Android malware that seems to combine a banking Trojan, a keylogger, and ransomware. Threat Fabric says the current versions of mystery bot spotted until now have been disguised as a Flash Player app for Android. And in general, the consumer must be aware that all of the so-called Flash Player apps that can be found in and outside the various app stores are malware. Why is anybody still using Flash? It's a huge security problem. Experts recommend that users avoid side-loading apps from outside the Play Store and avoid granting app access to the accessibility service, which in the vast majority of cases is used mostly by malware. But even when you go to the Play Store, even when you go to iTunes, the crooks have gotten stuff past their screeners there. It really is open season. And as if our economy didn't have enough problems and people struggling to get by, we're losing productivity to malware. We're losing money to malware. It's almost like we become a completely criminalized society from the top of the federal government all the way down to the bottom. All kinds of crime is rampant, especially cyber crime. Nobody seems to want to do anything about it. They're just out there. We've got to grab the guns. Somebody just wrote on in about the guy who shot the gunman up at the Walmart, and even the left-wing TV stations are saying this gunman was a hero. And yes, he is. And I noticed the story even made Fox News, and that's a good thing. The American people need to see when somebody does something good with a gun. Now, over at Kaspersky Lab, they have halted all cybercrime collaboration with European agencies and organizations to protest a European Parliament motion which called its software malicious. And Kaspersky said the accusation was untrue and demonstrated a distinct lack of respect. And this comes after both the United States and Great Britain took steps to remove Kaspersky software from some government systems. And again, it's just more Russia bashing. It's just more Russia bashing. Okay, getting on over to the World Cup, things are getting very interesting. Would you believe that 10% of the entire population of Iceland went to see the World Cup? And apparently they were in a stand doing the synchronized clap called the Viking Thunder Clap that just impressed everybody. But can you imagine, 10% of the entire population went to the World Cup. It's very popular around the world. They're trying to diss it here in the United States because, after all, we've got the real football. And they're trying to damage Russia's hosting of the World Cup the way they tried to diss the Sochi Olympics. And so there was this photo that was circulating online that purported to be a dog cull in Russia, where they were saying that the Russians are just killing stray dogs to get them off the streets for the World Cup. Ooh, bad Russia, bad Russia. They're just killing these dogs in a cold-blooded, cold-hearted attempt. Actually, the photo is from Pakistan, and it's from 2016. And Pakistan had a serious problem with feral dogs, and they decided to do something about it. But again, it's more of this fake news, Russia bashing. So, all right, let's talk about our volcano. It is still volcanoing. We had another 5.3 magnitude quake and explosion on Kilauea crater, and the walls of Halemaumau are continuing to collapse, and nobody knows how far down it's going to go. The outer walls of Kilauea are starting to slump as well. I hope they don't lose Volcano House. That's a very historic place. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we're talking about the volcano down on the Big Island, Kilauea. The Big Island is actually made up of three volcanoes that kind of just sort of merged together, Mauna Kea, Mauna Loa, and Kilauea. But they're actually separate volcanoes, although Mauna Kea, where the observatories are, that one is pretty much extinct, which is why they felt it was safe to put the observatories up there. And if you get to the Big Island, you have to get a four-wheel drive, and you have to stop at the visitor center for half an hour to acclimate to the altitude, because it's 14,000 feet. But it's worth the trip to see the telescopes, especially if you're able to like stay until after dark and look at the sky. And it really is an amazing thing here. But I want to put this in scale, because if you actually look at a map of the Big Island, the part where the volcano is erupting is actually just a small portion of the island. And unfortunately, the corporate media has sensationalized this volcano so much that a lot of people think the entire Big Island is in the process of melting down, which it is not. And I'm still getting emails from concerned people about whether Claire and I are safe. We are. We're on a completely different island. But it has been hyped and sensationalized, which doesn't mean to trivialize how serious it is, but you need to keep it in perspective, because it's been overblown so much. It is, in fact, negatively impacting our already much overstressed tourist economy. And Hawaiian Airlines is cutting back on flights to the Big Islands. The cruise ships that tour the entire islands, they're staying away from the Big Island. And the Hawaii Tourism Authority is obviously concerned. We're quite dependent on tourism because we've allowed the agriculture to go away. We don't grow a lot of sugar here anymore. We do grow pineapple, but we do need those tourists to come on down here. So how do you convince them to come to a state where one end just got flooded, record floods, and the other end is on fire. And I don't know, I kind of thought that the reverse might happen, that more people might go down to the Big Island and take one of the licensed, regulated, chartered tour boats or helicopters and see the volcano, because this is something to see. The TV just doesn't capture it. And I know that because when Claire and I went down to the Big Island some years ago, there was a minor eruption going on, nothing like this. But still, to see it in person is really quite amazing. So I thought there might be a surge in volcano tourism, and I'm sure there's some of that going on right now. But overall, our tourist economy is definitely under threat from this here. So anyway, getting on back to the eruption, most of the lava escaping from Fissure 8 seems to have settled into a channel that is meandering a little bit down toward the ocean, and it's about 100 feet wide, and it is flowing extremely fast. If you see the video of that flow, it's just amazing to think of that volume of liquid rock traveling that fast, and it's not something that you should ever even consider getting close to. But the U.S. Geological Survey is now saying, as far as they could tell, this eruption could last years. So who knows? We may see volcano tourism, because it's sounding like there's going to be a lot of time. Right now, the big issue, though, is are there going to be more explosions at the top, at Kilauea itself? And that, I'm sure, is rattling the people who live in the town of Volcano, which is right next door. And they're feeling these quakes. They're getting really rattled. And I think there's something like 500 quakes since noon on Sunday, noon on yesterday. Now, most of them are really tiny, only detectable on instruments. But they've had about 40 or 50 that are strong enough to be felt. Okay, 467 homes destroyed. Now, FEMA has sent some of their barges to anchor off the coast of the Big Island to provide temporary shelter for people who've been driven from their homes by the volcanic eruption. I think these are the barges they originally put together following Hurricane Katrina. But they do have them. They're actually rather impressive to look at, and they're going to be there. Meanwhile, the state government has come up with what appears to be a really good idea to how to help these people. And they're going to engineer a land swap where the state of Hawaii is going to take over this 9 square mile area that has now covered with lava, and they're going to trade it for other public lands that are basically what they call pre-lava, which means you can grow stuff on them. And they're basically just going to swap out the land, so these people now have a place to build a new home and a new life. And I think that was a really, really good solution to do that. Now, a lot of these homeowners, if their homeowner's insurance covered all disasters, then they're covered for this. There is no volcano insurance. But behind it all is the question being asked, why were these people allowed to build here in the first place, knowing it's an active lava zone? And that one is going to be bounced back and forth a lot. All right, we're going to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back with 2 phone calls. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And before we go to the phones here, a little bit of news, something that came on out from today's Senate hearing into the Inspector General report is Horowitz has revealed that former FBI Director James Comey is himself under a separate Department of Justice investigation for mishandling classified information. And apparently Grassley was out there saying Comey said he didn't expect this because it's just frivolous. No, it's not frivolous. It's not frivolous. You need to know what happened with it. I mean, somebody inside the government, you have to take classification seriously. That's like a prime requirement here. Okay, let's go back to the phones here. Pete in Florida, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Mike, just a quick note on the Comey thing. This guy, I mean, Horowitz has already explained that he's going to produce a document out of that. So you already know it's going to be a bum case. I mean, it's going to be a cover-up or whatnot. There is nothing going to come of this, my man.
Well, no, I'll tell you what's going to come of it. What's coming from all of this, bit by bit, the American people are losing confidence and trust in the government. And you can tell the government understands they've got a credibility problem right now because they're out there trying to polish their own image as hard as they can. And it's really not working.
Well, I hope you're right. The reason I called, I don't understand, my man, with your background in science, and as long as you've been in computers, why you haven't been on the Linux train sooner than you are.
Oh, I have Linux machines. I have Raspberry Pis. I love them. I love playing with those things. I mean, I learned Unix and C programming all the way back when I was with Robert Abel and Associates, when all of the world's computer animation software was based on Unix and C.
Well, if you still love that, there's Blender. That's, for me, that's the sort of there's an analogy between open source software versus Windows and freedom versus the police state that we have now. It just takes a little more work, but open source and freedom are worth it. I mean, they're a lot more enjoyable.
Unfortunately, because of my schedule, I don't have time to play with computer animation anymore. I wish I did. There are so many things I enjoy doing I don't get to do anymore. I don't remember the last time I played my banjo, and I did play a little bit with the Raspberry Pis, but I've packed them away so they don't get dusty, because right now from dawn to bedtime, it's the website, the radio show, taking care of Claire.
Sure, but I mean, that's all the more to my point that if you're not doing anything with esoteric software like 3D Studio Max that, you have to have a dongle to make work, you can either do it already on Linux or you can find a suitable open source alternative. And I don't run antivirus software, obviously, because I've been running Linux for 10 years, man, and I haven't looked back. I work for a Fortune 50 company. I have to run Windows. And I have a blue screen of death almost every time I log in the morning.
Yep.
On the company machine, and I don't ever have that on I run Linux Mint, and I don't have any problems on my personal machine.
Well, I'm on these Windows machines for reasons of past history, and Claire is still using her music software on the Windows machines, and I do the posting on this machine here. So, and they're running right now, but I think Windows 10 is an absolute disaster from the consumer's point of view. But I do, like, when I want to play, I play with Linux. In fact, a lot of my cryptographic stuff that I did was done on a Linux box back when I was writing that article about challenging the NSA.
Well, good. Then I feel more comfortable. Moving on to my last discussion about the Federal Reserve. We all know that the Federal Reserve isn't any more government than Federal Express.
Yep.
When you look at this, even when you said it earlier in the show about how the Federal Reserve donates a lot of money to the Congress critters, and when you think about the fact that they're holding all our debt, I think to myself, if they were a legitimate government entity, couldn't the president, with a swipe of his pen, just eliminate that debt? I mean, it's the sheer ignorance going on in this country, or the unwillingness to accept the truth, that's really killing us. I mean, you're doing a great job, as I always applaud you for, but we have to break this barrier of ignorance or unwillingness to face the truth by the American people, and I'll leave you with that, my man.
Well, they've been brainwashed in the public schools. I mean, when I was a kid, I saw the little film strip, and there was a phonograph record, and when the bell sounded, you would turn the little knob to get to the next slide about how the Federal Reserve, was America's bank, and it was really the only way to operate an economy as complex and sophisticated. Now we know, of course, it was just more brainwashing, and everybody's brainwashed to think this is the way it is supposed to be. And it isn't. This is not how the country started. It's not what made the country prosperous. In fact, over the last 100 years, private central banking is what has made our country borderline poverty. borderline third world, at least as far as ordinary Americans are concerned. We have some of the greatest wealth inequality in the world. We have, all these billionaires who live here, and then we have all these people living in the streets who are going hungry. We have these multi-billion-dollar stadiums, and right next to them are homeless camps. This is not a functioning society in any stretch of the imagination.
And speaking to that, one last point, I was just thinking that I make round about $45 an hour, and that's about triple what I started making when I first started this career. And you know what? I still feel like an entry-level salary because I'm constantly on that wheel playing, catch up. And I don't buy frivolous things. I like to go out to eat once a week, at an all-you-can-eat sushi buffet. But other than that, I like to save my money. I buy my, precious metals when I can, blah, blah, blah. And other than that, it's like I'm still trying to play catch up, and I feel I don't even.
You're hardly unique in that. The vast majority of Americans are exactly the same. When it's like that lady who called in about running a business, when wages and salaries go up, so do the prices. And Americans are struggling, trying to catch up. They're working harder and harder, and they're falling further and further behind. Meanwhile, you've got the money junkies sitting up there in their golden palaces just laughing their heads off at us. By the way, I would be very careful when you go to that sushi bar. Find out where they're actually getting the fish from. Because it's an issue around here in Hawaii where they're having to fly the fish in for the sushi from like over in the Atlantic because so many people are concerned about contamination from Fukushima.
That's a good idea. I'll take your advice, buddy. Have a good night.
All right, thanks an awful lot. By the way, did you know there's actually a restaurant in Phoenix called Federal Pizza? And it's another reminder, just adding the name Federal onto the front of your name doesn't really make you federal. All right, let's take another phone call from Mateus in Canada. Aloha, Mateus. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, and those fish really don't like being flown in because they're much more comfortable with swimming.
Yes, so, right.
If you're out of talking points, I've got about 10 here.
Well, I'm not out of talking points, but go ahead.
Oh. Okay, well, just to prove I can stay on topic, to start off with, after the summit, Trump said that even though it wasn't part of the summit, he's thinking of getting the military out of South Korea. And I call bullshit on that because obviously...
Please watch your language.
That would be...
Please watch your language. We don't want our on-air affiliates to get in trouble with the FCC.
Sorry about that. So that's a classic example of something that was discussed under the terms that you never disclosed that we discussed this. It was the same thing about the Cuban Missile Crisis, how the deal was, okay, fine, everything will back off, we'll take the missiles out of Turkey, but as long on the circumstances that it doesn't happen right now and we never admit that we said we would take the missiles out of Turkey. So probably what Trump did is the main leverage he promised is in the future we're going to pull out of South Korea, but they're probably going to use that to get as much concession as they can, and then we're going to vote Trump out, and the next person is never going to honor that. But
yeah, that is unfortunately one problem with our system of government is that new presidents can come on in and simply undo what previous presidents have done. And very often it is less a case of national policy than vanity and ego, wanting to undo the legacy of the previous president.
Yeah, too bad they don't start getting into the habit of wanting to put the previous president in jail when they severely break the law. That would be a nice habit to get into.
Yeah, I'd like to see that myself. I'd like to see that myself.
So possibly your viewing audience overall may be about 1/3 of Alex Jones, which would be really good because that would be incredible to pull that off without having all this Israel influence or money or whatever. And I'm just basing that on the idea that when I look at your show on the Ron Gibson channel on YouTube, it has about 1/3 the views, and so that might just be kind of like a general indicator that, which means that you have a gigantic, huge audience, like naturally. So What do
well,
you think?
I don't
do you
think.
have any idea what your audience is?
No, we don't, because RBN is not on Arbitron. We know how many people are on the streams, but we don't know how many podcasts are replayed and passed on. I know that I'm the darling of the Part 15 hobby transmitters across the country, but I don't think we can map views on the Ron Gibson channel over to, for example, on-air broadcasting, where there's no argument that Alex Jones has a huge bunch of on-air affiliates that are putting his stuff out. I'd like to know what my audience numbers are, but where we are right now, it's nothing more than a guess, and I refuse to speculate. And, I'm reaching some people. Obviously, the traffic at the website is up. I get a lot of email. So we are reaching people, and they're spreading the word. Most of what we put on out there is passed along word of mouth by word of mouth, from mouth to ear, as it were.
Yeah, well, definitely it's a successful operation, that's for sure. Just for fun, a completely different off-topic thing here. Regarding the DNA, I've heard that about 3% or 1 to 3% of DNA in Europe is related back to Neanderthal. Have you ever heard anything like that?
Yeah, and the latest research that I've read isn't that the Neanderthals went extinct, it's that they just interbred with the Cro-Magnons. And so we're all carrying a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they've also gone back and revised their knowledge of the Neanderthal and realized that it was an unfair stereotype, of the grunting brute and the club, because they have found Neanderthal campsites that have all kinds of sophisticated artifacts in them, including objects of art.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I wanted to comment on that topic a little bit. So the Smithsonian was donated a family of 4 giant, meaning like 6 to 7 foot tall, red-haired family that had copper tools and jewelry and everything, and it's donated. It was never put on display, but it was accepted, and it's archived. And the problem with it is that it doesn't agree with the idea of accepted, established time sequences that we're smaller in the past, we're getting bigger now. These guys had like bigger brains and stuff like that. And just what you're saying is that we are finding out that these Neanderthals, they may not have been so inferior. And here's one specific comment on this, is that how you point out that we're being ruled today, not by our superiors, but just by people that are more ruthless.
Yes.
And are willing to do what it takes to destroy.
Yep.
It's possible that the reason that we took the place of the Neanderthals, it looks like they were bigger, had bigger brains. They might have been nicer. We may not be superior in any way other than our ability to be ruthless and bloody.
That could very well be. I mean, anthropologists point out there were a number of pre-human hominid species in the ancient past, and it may be that the reason that we're here and they are not is our ancestors killed and ate their ancestors.
Yeah, and even I'm saying we may not even have been smarter at it. We may have just they might have been smarter than us, could have killed us, but they could have just been nicer. They could have been like, you know what, we don't want to exterminate them, even though we could. Okay, so redheads may be going back to Neanderthal. There does seem to be some indication that that's where that gene strain comes from.
Okay.
And if that's true, then that kind of explains the strange, weird, why are there always so many jokes putting down redheads? Why is it almost like a cliche, a cultural cliche that to be down on redheads? Well, subconsciously or our ancient DNA, these were the others, the Neanderthals. And then just to leave it on more of a lighthearted note is that we may have just celebrated at taxpayer expense a royal Neanderthal wedding just now.
Well, okay, I kind of wondered where you were going with that, because I was not really aware that redheads were the target of any specific social dissing. They're obviously they're exotics like blondes are, but again, I don't think that we know as much about our ancient past as we like to imagine that we do. Every generation comes along thrilled with the discoveries they make and thinking they're on top of the intellectual world. But what's that old saying? Time makes ancient truth uncouth. meaning each new generation is going to basically go back and say what the last generation thought was utter nonsense, whether it's the flat Earth, an Earth-centered solar system, or eventually, I think, the Big Bang Theory will be discarded as a huge scientific goof.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. And in order for the species to maintain itself, you have to have about 2.1 children per couple. That's to replace mom and dad when they get old and die.
Well, that depends on the environment. That depends on the environment. In a primitive agrarian environment, it's going to be a lot higher because of high incidence of childhood mortality and the fact that the little kids may get eaten by the dire wolves.
Right. Yeah, but right now in a first world country, it's about 2.1. The 0.1 is to take care of like accidental death before they get a chance to reproduce, basically. Yep. And so for every gay couple that are not having children, it requires a heterosexual couple to have 4.2 children to maintain the species. So
you're assuming a 50% mix of the population between gay and straight, and I don't think it's that. I think it's much smaller. I think your math work needs checking.
Yeah, if it's 50-50.
That's a bit of a reach. I don't think we're there. Okay. Anyway, listen.
No, we're not. We're like 3 or 4%.
I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our show today after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And over at the Daily Mail, they have this article about statins. And there has been lately, over the last few years, quite a few people coming on out and saying statins may not actually do any good. They may be harmful. And apparently there is a new article in the Prescriber Medical Journal. It was written by a group of doctors from Britain, the United States, France, and Ireland that say the side effects of statins may be far more common than major studies suggest, and basically said that the very theory on which statins are based of lowering bad LDL cholesterol to cut heart disease is itself fundamentally flawed. It may not work. Now, of course, the pharmaceutical industries are out there saying, that's utterly ridiculous here. The evidence that statins saves lives is overwhelming. The science is settled. The Arctic will be ice-free, blah, 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 blah. They're selling product out here. Now, a lot of people are becoming very uneasy about prescribing drugs to patients just in case they might have heart problems later on. And the authors of the new article, led by London cardiologist Dr. Asim Malhotra, question whether they are even as effective as thought, calling it the great cholesterol con, which has resulted in the over-medication of millions and, needless to say, the enrichment of the pharmaceutical industries. Which is why I'm a little skeptical about that disease X. Because I remember back in 2009 when they were cranking up this big push on the When Pigs Fly flu. It was even in National Geographic had an article saying there's a coming flu pandemic. It's going to wipe out most of the world unless you're prepared. Well, there's another pipeline controversy out there. This is the Trans Mountain Pipeline. And it's facing stiff opposition. And the former governor of the Bank of Canada said that there's probably going to be a conflict and protesters may die, but the government should push the project through anyway. So speaking at an event, David Dodge said, we're going to have some very unpleasant circumstances. There are some people who are going to die in protesting construction of the pipeline. We have to understand that. Nevertheless, we have to be willing to enforce the law once it's there. It's going to take some fortitude to stand up. And of course, this prompted outrage from climate activists. And it wouldn't be an issue if they would build the pipelines so that they don't break and don't leak. But these pipeline companies, they want maximum profits, and they build the pipelines just as inexpensively as they can. And that's why we have all these accidents where these things are breaking. Now, the latest attack on the environmental movement is oddly enough coming from the Department of Defense that is warning that foreign activists are weaponizing the legal system and using environmental lawsuits to damage U.S. defense ability. And so that's the latest thing. If you're an environmental activist, you're working for China, because they've already used up Russia to the point where nobody's believing that anymore. But that is utterly ridiculous. That is utterly ridiculous. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get on out of here. I got to do Goddard up there in Vancouver. Stay tuned for John Stadmiller. I'm sure he's got lots of wonderful things to share with you. Please take what you learn here, share it with your friends and family, do word of mouth, SneakerNet, email. Forget about the social media. It's totally compromised and being filtered right now. So please donate to Republic Broadcasting. Please donate to whatreallyhappened.com. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.